This meeting is being recorded.
All right. Yeah. All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for being here. We appreciate your participation. So the topic that we're going to discuss today is short-term rentals. So the category of short-term rentals also includes vacation rentals and party rentals. And as you remember, last year, we had a shooting at Ward 5 around 143rd Street, which included about 20 rounds shot at a party rental because some people showed up and they were not invited, and they didn't like the fact that they were not invited. That was quite a bit of alarming situation, at least for me. I met with them and had a conversation with them. I think Scott had a conversation with them. At that point, we tried to bring this up to the attention of a appropriate committee, which is community development. So I and Scott wanted to put an agenda item to discuss it, just to discuss it. Discussion item is the right of the council member. You are not asking for a vote, you are not asking for up or down, you are not asking for deny or approval. But we got rejected. I mean, the way they rejected is that they wanted us to bring the final solution to the table, and we are like, we are not here to provide a final solution. We are here to discuss. That's the discussion item. We're going to bring some ideas. I had the ordinance from City of Lawrence as an example, and that didn't get to anywhere. I kept going back and forth, and they were like, no, well, we gotta know everything that you want to do. I'm like, that's not me. So that didn't go anywhere. Now, this year we have a fatal shoot in a vacation rental. That's not a party, it's a vacation. But it seems like this is growing. It seems like the problem is growing. I have had posts on Nextdoor, and when you look at the opinion of the constituents, usually about 70–80% are concerned. And there is a 10–20%, 10–15% which says this is an overreaction. You gotta be, pragmatic about this and express everything that they have heard. It's an overreaction, it's insulated, it's not gonna happen again. For me, and I think my colleagues here, as your representatives, sorry about that. Hey, I look good from back. I appreciate it. Yeah, I'm glad I look good from back. So I think we are here because we are on the belief that we need to hear from you, and according to what people want, we need to take some sort of action. Right now, the way it is that there is almost no hands of the City of Overland Park other than some sort of license application for a vacation rental. That could be cool, but there are other ways, other mechanisms to regulate this as well. Apparently, that's not enough. Now, I have Mike Bozick from a company named Granicus. Mike, can you hear us? Right.
I can.
Yeah.
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes. I mean, we can hear you. We should hear you better, and I'm going to make you to be heard much better. Okay. Which is going to be where it is. So, as I was talking to Mike, the number one element that you need in terms of regulating anything, if you're going to regulate it, is knowing what's happening. What situation do you have? How many do you have? Where are they? And he's going to give us a presentation for about 15 minutes about how their company, their software, can help the City of Overland Park understand who's doing vacation party, how short-term rental. And according to their data, this is very important and interesting. About 230–40 properties we have under such category, and 90% of them is owner absent. Because there is one way that you live in that place and you rent it for a couple of hours for a baby shower or something like that. There is another more kind of like motel operation, is that you don't live there, and every weekend you rent it, or it's up for Airbnb and stuff like that. Business portion of it. So according to Mike, and we're going to listen to that, according to him, 90% of them they don't live. The city of Lawrence, I'll give you an example. The ordinance of the city of Lawrence says if you don't live there, you have to bring the signature of your neighbors that they are okay with. Which is, in my humble opinion, they are the most affected ones immediately next to that operation, and they should have a much better say. In that neighborhood around 143rd, there was 3 houses there. And as I am there interviewing with Fox News about the shooting, 2 minivans are passing by of the next day party, full of people being driven away from another party which was held there. We will see. So if that's okay with you guys, we get Mike going, so we could, when we are talking about this, we can know what is available, how we can have our eyes open. We had a meeting with the staff, with the Scott, about this back a year ago when they wouldn't let the agenda. At least we could meet with the staff. And one of the problems they had is that how do we know who has it? Because if you wanted us to regulate anything, we need to know where they are. And this is probably a solution.
I think 2 of the problems was, that was one, and another one, even the ones they identified, you know, like in a situation where it's the owner's out of state or it's corporate owned or something like that. I was kind of surprised to learn that the police chief said all we can do is show up when reported, you know, take care of the situation at hand. They have no recourse on the owner of the property. From a law enforcement standpoint.
May I just interrupt you, Dr. Farassati? That incident happens at 151st place, where that first shooting was. That's
Not 140.
Lamar and 151st place.
I tend to forget that experience.
As it was breaking up, there's
Shots inside.
shots in the
and
car,
shots
they
outside.
got in a car and drove around.
Yeah.
Yes.
So Councilman Mosher is with us, Councilman
Correct.
Cox is with us, Councilman Pastor, and we know Scott for sure. So I'm gonna ask them to go and have their opening statement, if there's anything they want to say, and then we ask Mike to please. Scott?
Well, you know, I think that for me, it's basically coming down to, do we want the government involved in our personal business? Do we want the government to have control, overreach, and authority for our own property? I wouldn't want somebody to come and tell me what I can do, what I can't do with my house. However, I think when, you know, if I had my neighbor that all of a sudden had a party house, I'd have a problem with it. But I would think that I could try to control that. Homeowners Association. I was president of the homeowner association for 10 years, and we controlled that kind of stuff. And believe it or not, the homeowner association has more authority over what you do with your property than we do. But the other thing that I want to tell you is I talked to Chief Dunn here, and I don't have the numbers in front of me. He's supposed to email them to me. But overall, in all the B&Bs that we have throughout the city, most of them are in the north part of the city. They're starting to spread set, but the crime rate is relatively low. When you look at it, it's really low. I don't have the numbers to quote it, but that was his overall impression. He's put those together. It will come out of the heat. I'm open, but I want to do what you want to do. I mean, you guys elected me. As far as I'm concerned, if you don't want it, I'm okay with it. Personally, I wouldn't want it next to me, and that's how I look at things. If I didn't want it next to me, I wouldn't want it. I mean, like apartments. I don't want it behind my house, so I don't want it behind your house. So that's how I kind of look at things. So, but those are questions. You know, we're going to ask questions back and forth down the devil's advocate, but we need to open everything. It's like they're free. We want apartments. They threaten to close their doors, and some people would say, well, they're not going to. Well, I think they were going to anyway. The money that they were going to put towards, you know, shoring up the floodplain areas was going to go to where they could build houses. It wasn't going anywhere. I mean, I wouldn't trust them as far as I can throw them, but that's different. So I think, that's the kind of stuff we gotta do. We gotta do what we want. Fair trade does what they want. You know what? I'm glad to be a part of it.
I got this offer. I feel across the house. My house is really like that. I got this offer. You have to do the next week.
I personally think that they were gonna leave it open for the golf course for a little while, and I think they were gonna make it into houses, so they wouldn't need our permission. And I personally think the 5 million they were pledging was gonna go to shoring up where they were gonna build houses. That's just me and my, it's purely supposition on my part. But I will tell you that, I just, in talking to them, I just couldn't get them to commit. They wouldn't do anything right. And that tells me there's gotta be other motives, so. These Airbnbs, you know, I don't want someone coming in and telling me what to do with my life. But at the same time, I want to protect it. And I can tell you, I wouldn't want it next to me. So don't get offended when we ask the question, because we need that information on both sides. So we can make.
I guess my opening comment is that the thing you find out in most issues like this, when you have to actually go from concept to an act in law, is things more complicated than they sound. So I always try to temper back my initial thought about it. My initial thought was simpler than all of these. So these are the kinds of meetings where everybody gets to say, here's the thing I thought of, here's the thing. But it is really, in essence, if you think about it, it is a property rights issue. And sort of, if you look at what government, the municipal government exists for, one of the primary things it exists for is to resolve a dispute between my rights on the property I own and the rights of the people that live next to me. Right? I can do whatever I want unless I start restricting their rights for their happiness and for their property. This is clearly one of those issues of where do the rights change, right? When is your right being exercised, taking away another person? I will tell you that I sort of lead with, by default, looking at this as, if you don't live in the home, right, and you rent it out as a matter of course, you are to be running a business, not living in a home. So I don't know how I don't know why we can't regulate that really as, you're no longer regulating a residential use of the property. You're saying you're outside your zoning and you're running a business there, right? So I don't, this whole idea of sort of running a motel, if you will, right, in a residential area, which is kind of to me what you're doing if you don't live there. I am open to people saying, here's what you're missing here, right? But that's what it kind of feels like to me. I am certain I would not want that in my neighborhood. And the problem really with leaving everything up to HOAs, especially in the north part of the city, that's why it is on my direct constituents, so is that they don't have homeowners associations. I mean, the number of complaints already starting to flow in about slight change we made about how we were handling trash and trash pickup and the rules around that, because we don't regulate the price that the people, very few people who will do it charge, and they sort of just abuse people who don't have HOAs to negotiate, right? And it's very, what do we do about that? And they just raise their rates again, now that they have to add, right? Same one-time pick, they try to pick up, right? So that's crazy. And those people are kind of powerless to negotiate. So, you know, you leave it up to the HOA, that's fine if you have an HOA, but everybody doesn't have an HOA. And so I do think when you get into things like property rights, so I will tell you, I come to it with a bit of a bias of, I sort of don't understand why we allow for you to just own a home that's a business in a residential area and rent it out. Now, I'm open to, there's a way to regulate who's there, and what, I don't know how you would do that, but it just seems like something that I don't really get. Person who lives there and lets someone come and rent a room, which is kind of where I guess Airbnb started, although now it's just Airbnb. I guess that's a little bit of a different thing. You're there, you have someone to stay with you. I'm open to that's a different issue than just, I don't live here and I just rent the thing out all the time. But in any event, I come to it with a bias in favor of
viewing this as a business, not a residence, and it is doing harm to your neighbors beyond what your rights are in a residence area. But I'm open to saying, hey, Jeff, here's what you're missing. The facts will lead you to my conclusion.
There's a couple things from my perspective. So my in-laws live in a condo complex, so they winter in a condo complex in Scottsdale. And they had, in the first years I started, is they rented for a month at a time because that was the minimum the complex would allow. And the state of Arizona was one of 7 states that came in and said, you HOA are restricting property owner rights. You can't do that. So they blasted away the 1-month requirement and said, property owners can do whatever they want. So I have observed over the past 6 years, a very friendly, great place to go with my family to visit my in-laws, to become party rentals over weekends and vacation getaways, Arizona, their spring break most years, and the guys' golf trip that are out, causing a ruckus at night. And the number of changes I've seen in that community has created an interesting impression on me. So I was, in a way I thought, gosh, I thought the government was looking out for us, yet now that here they are, punishing the residents. And so when Jeff talks, when Scott talked about homeowner rights, I see, I went back and I looked at that discussion in Arizona where the governor was very well intended and saying, hey, this is property rights. We don't want to allow this. These restrictions, and at the time, a lot of people were saying, you're going to get this, you're going to get out of town state rentals, you're going to get party houses, and the Arizona legislature state level said, you're wrong, and actually now there is legislation going through the state of Arizona saying, maybe they were right, and so let more local control prevail. So I've seen this firsthand. Similar to Scott Faris, I sat down with Chief Sanchez during my orientation. I asked about his perspective. I think at the time they told me there are about 300 rentals that they had on their radar. Most of them were good and actually good. Most of them were not notorious. I guess good. And in fact, what's hard is someone had told me that this house where the death had occurred at, someone's like, oh, I have a friend of our family that stayed there for a month because they were here helping out a sick friend, and so I guess from my perspective, I look at it a couple of different ways. One is property owner rights. If I get transferred to my job for a year and I want to come back, and I still want my house, and I want to rent it out maybe a month or 6 months at a time. I'm not a business. I'm just trying to get someone to pay my mortgage because I want to come back to the exact house I was in. To me, I appreciate that property owner rights and trying to do that. I also appreciate their rights. And so I guess similar, I'm open, I want to hear, I get both sides. I get that there are some very, very negative consequences that this is.
Yeah. And I was with Faris a year ago, we're going to try to bring this up for discussion, and it does get more and more complicated the more you get in. My initial instinct was, if you don't live there, then you can't rent it. It's I agree with Jeff. I mean, you're bordering out on a zoning violation almost there. But where it gets even more complicated, and so the way I went about seeing what people are doing and how it's big. I mean, this is a big business. It's all around the country. I think we've been insulated from it some because of our higher real estate prices. But these businesses are getting big enough now that that's fine. Go buy the expensive house. And I've seen, I went through what other cities, some cities put a large permit fee on it to raise the price of, hopefully raise the price of the rental. But what I looked at was, you can simply go on YouTube and look up the short-term rentals, and they'll give you, the investment experts will tell you how to get around these rules. One of them being, okay, if they ban short-term rentals, then you form a LLC, and you have a corporate, corporate house, which I live by, I mean, a Sprint corporate house. Executive home or something they called it, people cover it. And you rent, and you simply put it on the books that way, and then you go about business. And so there's a lot of ins and outs, and one of the biggest things they said to deter people from doing this was the actual process of the city council looking into and discussing the regulations. They said avoid those cities altogether because you don't know what's coming out. Which I found interesting. But yeah, I lean towards definitely that if you don't live there and you're running a business, first of all, I don't know how they have insurance. Second of all, I think they are pushing on zoning laws. I think, well, even if they're not, I think we should make where they're pushing on zoning laws. That's where I'm kind of leaning at the moment. So, but like I said, it's gotta get in to see what other people are doing and how people are getting around it. Like it was a kind of eye opener for me. I mean, there's websites out there that tell people how to get around it. And I was a little surprised by it. Just on the LLC and open up. Good idea. But we're done. Yeah. Right.
So two things before we go to Mike. Number one, if you leave it to your homeowner association, you gotta go to court. That triggers your HOA going to court, hiring a lawyer, going to court, and taking the owner. And HOAs, last thing they want to do is to end up with $15,000 worth of lawyer fee. That's one I'll do for someone on the other side of the neighborhood. Right. And they would be up to objection. I know for the fact that. But that's the level of community that you have, just like discussed. Number one. Number two, there is an article in the Charlotte Mission Post which explains the regulations of neighboring cities. If memory serves me right, limit says no less than 6 months. Right. So there is some cities which say, okay, no less than X number of months, and by that they essentially cut out the vacation rentals and car rentals unless this legal maneuver. Right. Takes. But I think at this point you're going to go ahead and listen to Mike, and Granicus not only has a software which detects constantly scans for these and refers them to you so you know who is doing it, but also, as Mike told me, they can also assist in writing certain legislation language, which I didn't get that much information from him. So Mike, if you can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you. Can y'all hear me?
Well, we can hear you.
Okay, great. I am talking. Yes.
Yeah.
Can you hear me okay?
Okay.
Can y'all hear me or no?
Use the speaker. I hope the mic at top.
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
You're loud and clear on Zoom.
Not loud, it's not loud enough. Okay. There it is. All right. Talk one more time.
You need to put over to, you're on the Epson volume.
I know, but it doesn't give me any other option. Wait, another option.
There's a document.
Type audio in your little search box.
Here we go.
Yeah, purple guy here.
Come on, yeah. John, get here. Company computer man.
He's gonna bill you for this, Faris.
I might actually have to call somebody.
Can you call a friend?
So this is one USB, and a USB and a regular. Which one do you want?
This is USB.
That's USB, and also you got a. Let's see.
talk again? Hello?
Well, just find out.
It doesn't see it at all, so. Well, yeah, this should be your speaker output.
Can those that are on Zoom hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay, perfect. Yeah, thanks, Michelle.
What are we supposed to be doing here on Zoom?
I think we're supposed to be good. All right, can y'all hear?
Yes.
Can hear. Okay, perfect. All right, well, thank you all for letting me join. I appreciate it. Got 15 minutes here. But I think what's important is that this is always a discussion when I give a presentation, so feel free to jump in, ask questions. I have prepared just some general information, but also like what we've seen on the industry. We work with over 400 government entities, okay, with this very obviously complex topic. And what I'd like to start with and preface with is that y'all are all right, okay? And that's part of the issue here and what makes this so complex, but also, and I wrote down a bunch of things that were said that I could hear. So I am gonna go to some of those. But yeah, I mean, there are ways to get around legislation. Somebody said the concept and going from concept to an active law is complicated, and part of that is because people come to this topic in this conversation, they have many discussions just like this one, many of them, and don't get anywhere because there's a lot of speculation that comes in. And I'd like to just state one of the things that was said in chat. I don't know if y'all saw it, but Michelle Hills, who's on, she said, I'd like to go on the record to express my strong opposition to vacation properties in Overland Park. These are not homeowners, but absentee landlords with no investment in maintaining the safety and integrity of our community. Mayor thinks it's a complicated issue, and the answer is just say no. And you know, and Michelle has every right to say that, obviously, and feel that way. But the other thing that we need to think about in this climate, that yes, there are a lot of people who aren't in these homes. In this climate of COVID and the uncertainty of people's jobs or, you know, getting laid off pretty quickly, somebody brought up the fact that someone was there for a month taking care of them, taking care of their sick friend, right? This stuff does happen with the climate of COVID. There are people that this is their only asset that they have, you know, once they're out of work. And this is their only means of making an income. So that is part of it. And yes, this is so complex when it comes from, yes, this is a property rights issue, but when does your right become someone else's? I think was said also. And I mean, it ends up just having to be a compromise because the local government, they're meant to look out for the residents, right? But at what point are you taking away someone else's means for an income, right? When it is their right to do that. What I will say is that outright bans do not solve the problem in our experience. Because that we work with over 400 government entities. We are also starting to contract with HOAs because they want to proactively identify and enforce short-term rentals. Okay. So even though there are these regulations with HOAs, and yes, someone also said that, yeah, there are a lot of these short-term rentals that aren't a part of HOAs. That is very valid also. You know, some of these in Arizona also, the state legislation there, the best thing you can really do to regulate is have a licensing process, right? The other thing that I didn't hear mentioned was that regardless of who it is, and I think most communities, what they're doing to make sure that these are regulated and enforced is that, and proactively in a timely manner, is that they have a 24/7 local contact that can respond to any complaint within an hour, right? So there is that sense of ownership. And then what ends up happening is that there ends up being those problem properties over and over and over, that maybe those are the ones that you take away there, right? Because frankly, they're the ones who have been abusing the legislation. I don't know if that makes sense. But I did reach out and have a conversation with, who was it? Vincent Jones, maybe about a year ago, who handles licensing for the short-term rentals. Not sure where he is now, if he's still there, but when there was that shooting about a year ago, I did have a conversation with Overland Park. And obviously nothing really came from that. So the neighborhood affidavit is a really good idea also, because part of being part of the community, right, is what is the neighborly thing to do? I think that's where I always go. These people didn't come into the community and move to the community to have a revolving door of neighbors, but at the same time, yeah, they have the right to do something like that in most cases with their property. So that neighborhood affidavit, yeah, get a sign off from the neighbor on the left, from the neighbor on the right. I mean, if I didn't live in my property, I'd want help, in fact, having my neighbors look out for my property and make sure that there wasn't illegal activity taking place. So that is one thing that has really been helpful. In Arizona, the licensing aspect, I don't know who was talking about Arizona, but you're not allowed to actually legally register, permit, or license a short-term rental in the state of Arizona. But the best way around that is that they're starting to get these communities, they're getting emergency contact information, which is basically a 24/7 local contact that can respond within a certain amount of time. Because the best way to regulate and proactively regulate these short-term rentals is by having some type of licensing process. A good idea also is, yes, to increase, I think, one, to have a short-term rental license it's specific to short-term rentals, right? It doesn't just get lumped in with all the other businesses, because frankly, they're not just like any other business. But also, yes, you can make those annual license fees or those permit fees more than the other businesses. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to share my screen. Let me know when y'all can see it. Okay, great. So these tend to be the top priorities that we see across the entire country, right? There's first things first, there's noise, parking, traffic, trash problems. There's party houses, which we're talking about. Of course, that's where the shootings have been coming from. You know, some communities are eliminating those one-night bookings, right? That you're actually not able to book for one night, because most likely someone's going to book for one night. They're just going to try to have a party there, right? And then there's probably some kind of illegal activity happening there. There's building safety. They're responsive to neighbor complaints. There's tax compliance. Affordable housing is a part of the conversation. There's a lot that's coming to this conversation all across the country. And I feel for you. I feel for the community, the residents. I feel for Overland Park and your staff, because it's not easy to land on that compromise, right? So this is what we do see, though. These are the main challenges. One, getting visibility into this data is nearly impossible, which is why when we created this industry, in fact, we pioneered this industry of short-term rental identification and compliance in 2015, and now work with over 400 communities. We have a thriving business because this is really hard to do. We have even found that if you have one full-time staff member that all they did was a manual search for these short-term rentals, they could possibly bring in about 100 short-term rentals into compliance, manage about 100. But with the growth year over year, it ends up being pretty impossible. So second is just the manual processes that weigh on the team in the budget. So, this is looking at kind of what the staff of Overland Park has to deal with this topic. There's kind of this internal alignment that suffers and interdepartmental collaboration that suffers because this is a really unique topic where it falls within a lot of different departments, right? Which also makes this a little bit more complicated. And then there's just a lot of time wasted in trying to find room in the budget for this topic. And I think this is important to note for Overland Park, is that what ends up happening with outright bans is communities think that's going to solve the problem. And frankly, it doesn't. There are still people operating illegally. They will, which still takes resources from municipal staff to be able to enforce those proactively, right? And you'd probably imagine that these are probably the same type of rentals where that illegal activity is happening in the first place, right? So either way, that's probably going to be there. It's just, hey, is this something that's going to end up being an expense for Overland Park? Because the other thing you'll have to think about, as you know, is the tax dollars and how that's spent, right? So this is either something that these short-term rental operators, they can pay more for a license fee. It covers the cost even for a solution like ours, because either way, that ends up being what happens is that communities get a solution like ours to proactively identify and notify short-term rentals. But here's the problem, because it's not just the people who are operating illegally just to operate illegally. Frankly, it's just, I think we all know, everybody in the room, human nature is to take the path of least resistance, right? We do what's easy. So if something's easier to do, we're more likely to do it. If it's harder to do, we're less likely. So what we have found is that less than 10% of people actually come forth willingly and voluntarily to get registered, to get a license and or remit taxes for their short-term rentals. We also know that there's 20-30% increase in just issues with short-term rentals year over year. So that comes from the fact that just the short-term rental market is exploding. So that less than 10% of people coming forth voluntarily, it's really easy to just say, I need some additional income right now. I'm just going to put my home, I'm just going to put my home up and advertise it and not look at what it actually takes to be a compliant property running a short-term rental. So the listings are 15 times what they were since in 2011. Short-term rentals are outpacing hotels in 27 global markets. That's a whole nother conversation as far as protecting the community and the hoteliers, the people that are living there and contributing to the community, and creating a level playing field for them. But what a lot of communities, to that point, what a lot of communities are doing is they are treating these short-term rentals the same way they might treat a hotel. That's the other way, because someone also was saying there are ways to get around legislation, such as forming an LLC and operating as a hotel or as a business, and that's the way around it, right? So that's kind of how communities have been making sure something like that doesn't necessarily happen. So the other issue is that there's hundreds of different platforms out there now. We monitor over 70 sites, relevant sites that are going to be relevant to every community, because there are some that are West Coast specific or East Coast specific or community specific. But we monitor over 70, like Airbnb. And a lot of communities don't know that there are actually that many. So that's another way to stay off the radars. Communities trying to look at Airbnb only. There are many other sites that people are resourceful. Frankly, they're going to find a way to operate either way. And there is a 240% increase in party-related complaints just over the past year, which is part of why this conversation is coming up. We had a shooting last year and a shooting this year. And this boils down to a couple of things. One, there's economic opportunity, potentially with licensing fees for short-term rentals. There's diminished neighborhood character, which has been talked about here. There's an impact on housing affordability. And then there's just wasted time and money that goes into the conversation, the efforts to try to figure out what to do with short-term rentals, okay? So like Dr. Faris spoke to, we have identified there's about 312 listings. These are advertisements. So the short-term rental operators are advertising multiple times per property, right? There are those people who are trying to get as much business as possible. Normally, people are advertising 2-3 times per property, but we're seeing that most people are probably advertising once, right, with these numbers. So there are about 230 unique short-term rentals, and they are spread throughout Overland Park, right? I think someone was saying that it's originally they were a little bit more north, but they are starting to spread throughout the rest of the city. So a little breakdown here. Does anybody have questions about this? I only have 15 minutes, but I said it would be more of a conversation.
All right, we give you another 5. Don't worry about it. Because of technical information. Questions
I'm
for
not
him?
going to extend past midnight.
You're not? Yeah, I know.
Explain what the color of the dots are. Are those just the different platforms?
Yeah, you know, those are just the different. So we monitor over 70. This is just the big players, right? Just we do this initially to put into a slide deck like this and have a conversation and get an idea of what's going on. So you can see in the top right here is TripAdvisor, Priceline, on Expedia, Airbnb, and other. So that's what the different colors are representing there. And in our dashboards, what the city would be able to see is that this works like a Google map, right? So you can go into satellite view. These pins, once we identify the addresses, we also attach them to the actual county assessor information. So we have owner information. So I think one of the concerns is, hey, these people, they're operating as a business. They don't live here. That's the other problem is maybe if staff, y'all tried to identify a short-term rental, you found an address. Some communities just send letters to the address and nothing happens because the owner doesn't get it. They don't live there. So that's another thing that we do is that we attach these listings and advertisements to the address, to the parcel with the assessor information, but we also attach the owner and the owner contact information wherever their primary residence is, so they can be notified, right? But like Dr. Faris mentioned, we have found here that there's almost 90% of all of those 230 short-term rentals. Those are entire home rentals, which we assume they are not owner occupied, right? This 10, 11% here, the partial home rentals, that's where somebody lives in the home, the owner lives there, right? So to Michelle's point, yeah, these people, they don't live in the community. Well, actually 10% of them do. And they are just trying to, someone said, just, yeah, try to pay their mortgage, try to make some extra income, or maybe just trying to get by, right? So that's the other issue is trying to ban completely, is that there's part of your community here that, you know, they might really need this. So the other thing, if we're talking about higher permit fees annually, the nightly rate, the average nightly rate here is $150 a night. So even if, you know, we see communities, the average is $300 a year, but we're seeing communities that are charging $500 a year, $1,000 a year. And, you know, frankly, the short-term rental operators with a nightly rate of $150, even if it was $300, that's 2 nights. You know, it's 2 nights in a year. And where there are communities that have tourism year round, we're seeing that people are able to book, if they are operating as a business, they're able to book out 6 months out of the year at least, 180 days, making significant revenue. So to that point, for what Michelle was saying, yeah, if there are a lot of investors there, and they aren't living in the community, they aren't contributing to the community in any way, the least they could do is have an active permit and have a 24/7 local contact that can respond to some of these complaints within a certain amount of time before it gets out of hand, right? Because I'd imagine, you know, before there's a shooting, there's a party, there's probably a noise violation. You know, I think in most cases, someone doesn't just walk through the door or go for that. But I think probably people were probably there for a while. There was probably a lot of noise, a lot of drinking or whatever it is. And it led to that. So getting to that, and I bring that up because we identify short-term rentals, but we handle everything from identifying them to notifying them to allowing them to get the permit through our system. We have a 24/7 complaint hotline where someone can complain and provide evidence in real time, talk to a person in the US, and we can communicate with that 24/7 local contact and let them know, hey, there's a loud noise at your home. Please respond to this within this certain amount of time, or you know, this is what happens depending on what the city decides to do. What's that? So also the 81% of these are single family homes, 17% are multifamily. And then it looks like there's about 2% that are unknown. They don't fall within the normal classification. So we've seen RVs and tree houses and boat houses and tents and all kinds of stuff. But that's what that unknown home type is.
Sorry, this might not be.
Another issue here is that just the growth, what's that?
This might not be notable.
Okay, correct.
I guess I'd look at it. Is this something that an out-of-state owner or somebody doesn't ever
Well,
know?
I'm almost, I'm at 9 minutes.
Rent their house out because they're on assignment somewhere else. Do you have a perspective? If it's a single family house, is it temporary or long-term, or is that no?
Mike, before you answer that question, you are the host, so go mute all the participants on the Zoom, so they don't interfere with you, because I can't do it now because I'm not the host.
Yeah, I just did that. I just did that for one of them.
Yeah, sorry. I don't know if it's knowable. It's probably hard because you probably have to look at each one by one. But just curious if your platform is able to figure out are these houses pretty much, you know, for rent year round, or is it a situation where someone's gone for a couple of weeks and they run it out, or they get reassigned somewhere for like a month, or is this kind of a business where they just turn their home into a full-time rental? Is that knowable?
Yeah, and you know, it's a great question, but those type of the answer to those type of questions are why communities end up getting our solution. So here's the other information that we can give. Here's one thing I think that's important also. There's been 30% growth over the past year in just Overland Park alone, just with short-term rentals. That's significant, right? That's really significant. That's net growth, by the way. With how much change of hands there is everywhere, we see normally that there's over 40% of short-term rentals that are listed today weren't a year ago. So 30% net growth for all the new ones that came up and all the old ones that came down. That is significant, right? So if there was staff trying to do that manually, it'd be almost impossible. To answer your question about, hey, is there any way to really figure out, are these long-term, are they short-term? We do actually in this dashboard, this is what a dashboard might look like for staff, but we do break this out to short and long-term rentals, because we do know that there are long-term rentals and short-term rental operators, long-term rentals that are advertising on short-term rental sites because they're just trying to get someone in the rental, right? They are operating as a business, right? They're trying to get someone to cover their mortgage at the very least. So there's that, but we also have this rental unit record that shows, if we look over here in this timeline activity, I can kind of explain the rest here in a second, but the main thing here, timeline activity, we pull in reviews, and we actually attach these reviews to block days on the calendar. Okay, so you can see that there's 1 documented stay, 2 documented stay, 3 documented stay. Does anybody in the room know the only way that you can actually leave a review through a short-term rental platform? Anybody know?
That answer is no.
Okay, yeah, the silence, I wasn't sure. You have to book and pay and stay to that platform. It's the only way you can leave a review. So we know for sure that if someone left a review that they stayed there, okay? But what we're also seeing now is that there's huge incentive on both parties for the short-term rental host, but also the people staying there to leave reviews, to leave good reviews, to leave bad reviews. So what we are seeing now, this is kind of an old snapshot, but I looked at a live client the other day, and there was a short-term rental. It had 15 reviews one month, 13 the other month, 17 the other month. So we could assume there, right, that if somebody is getting that many reviews and that many documented stays, they're operating this thing as a business.
Mike, can I ask? No, I love you. Mike, do you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. That joint on the left, is that in Overland Park?
No.
Yeah,
It is not.
there it is.
It is not. Why? Because you want to stay there? Yeah, no, this is just a general sample, just to kind of show what we'd be able to show the community. This is a rental unit record. We deduplicate all the listings, so staff can really focus on just proactively enforcing the short-term rental at the property level, right? Instead of getting confused at how many listings are out there, because these short-term rental operators that are operating this as a business, they're advertising a bunch. There's different pictures on different sites, different nightly rates, different descriptions. You can't even tell these two advertisements from each other, right? So if something is a little bit more expensive on one side out of someone's budget, and it's less expensive on another site, but still happens to catch their eye, and they didn't connect the two, that those were the same, they may book it. So no, this isn't an Overland Park, but we'd be able to also, if we handled the short-term rental, the permit or the license, for example, we would be able to tell if this is a compliant property or not. So anyone.
I don't know why this matters, but I'm just wondering if you can track how many of these have a management company? Because when you rent these places out, you still have logistics. You got the keys, you got blah blah blah. Is that knowable? How many of these have management companies versus just the owner deals with it individually? But if they're out of town.
Yeah, good question. And in fact, we have a property manager portal, because part of this too is, again, human nature is take the path of least resistance. We do what's easy. So if something's easy to do, we're more likely to do it. We make this process super easy. If there was a short-term rental specific license, we make the process really easy to come into compliance, both for the property managers and for the single operators. Okay. Also, we know that a lot of them communicate by their phones, over email. So a lot of them are operating their entire businesses from their phones. So that's the other thing too, is looking out for the community in a way, like the property managers who live there, the hoteliers. But yeah, we would be able to tell who is being operated by a property management company. Absolutely. But what's that?
It might be part of a regulatory strategy, is all I'm saying.
Yeah, and I think that's once the customer goes live with our system, that is something that we're able to do, right? Because we know what someone will come in and do when they fill out their permit application, that workflow, or a license, whatever it is that the city might decide. We are gonna capture that information. Do you have a property manager? What is the property management company? That's all going to be in here, attached to that short-term rental unit.
Got another question.
Please.
So Overland Park has a rental inspection program. So people can pay $120. The city comes out, does an inspection, grants them a permit per se for 2 years. So do you know, or can you speak to what type of system the city uses? Do we use something like this to track those inspections? There's a map on the website, but it does not specify how many people have applied for that rental inspection permit.
Yeah, that's something that we'd be able to track in our system also. And it would be short-term rental specific.
I think they come up front not voluntarily ask you for a license because they want to be in compliance. But what Mike is saying here is that now we're gonna go say, hey, you are running the rental. Why are you not applying for a license?
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I was wondering if we track as a city, how many of those rental inspection permits are for the purpose of renting it nightly, weekly, et cetera, versus annually? Like, I don't know if we
Right.
that
I think
level
it's
or
not a
not.
property inspection, I don't think it is. I think it's kind of just, we went out to the property, it wasn't for. Very.
So if Mike has to take the 230 rentals in Overland Park, if I'm not misquoting him, short-term rentals, right? But we just,
Specifically short-term rentals.
but we just heard that Frank says there's 300. So their numbers is actually more than.
So I can tell you this, you go to VRBO, you put Overland Park, it will say displaying over 300 rentals. I did that like 3 days ago. So what I have also found is if you do that, it will say somebody in Olathe or in Prairie
Yeah,
Village.
those aren't all of them.
Yeah, but there's hotels on there, right? There's hotels on there. There's long-term rentals on there.
I would theorize that whoever is saying over 300 is not. We're not spending.
The city come out with a number of 212, I think, on Jack Messer set some stuff out, I think, Friday. So, but I think the number was 212, if I remember, but he was saying 220, so it's close.
Yeah.
So Scott, and then we have 212 licenses issued.
No, it just said the rental, I don't know where it got that, probably the same way he did, Mike did here.
Right. So
But, we don't have any information on what they have as far as permits.
Do you think there's an opportunity for the city to outsource this to someone like this company? Where we could
the
get
cost
information?
that Mike projected to me was about $6,000 a year.
Yeah, it's only just to identify the addresses. You know, so also there is definitely opportunity if y'all decide to have a short-term rental specific license, and you know you can make that licensing fee. What a lot of communities do is, again, mostly they're making decisions based on speculation, right? I feel this way, you feel that way. Let's throw out this totally random number for a licensing fee. And I think that operators in the community want to know, well, why? What's the point? What does that mean, that number? So I think that this is part of where y'all can have that discussion of do we want it to be a national average of $300 a year? That's a 2-night stay for the rentals that are in Overland Park, right? So I think there's absolutely opportunity that more than covers the costs. And I don't know how Overland Park is structured. Some communities, they are able to, make that licensing fee a revenue stream. Some others, they're supposed to break even, right? So again, that's another part of the conversation too. But this would more than cover the cost of our solution. Even if y'all decide to do a 24/7 complaint hotline and have us send the letters for you and all that good stuff.
Right, thank you very much for your presentation. And
Yeah, no worries.
a few more questions from you, and then, so this part of this conversation tells us that we could have our eyes on the market.
Yeah.
You still haven't answered anything about what us as a community want to do with it. once we know.
Right.
So if you have questions, ask Mike, and then otherwise we move on. And Mike, you're quite welcome to stay on the meeting as well. But we gotta listen to them to see what they want to do.
We've been here for over an hour, and I heard some really good opening remarks that expressed the concerns, and I think most people hear about concerns. They talked about it's a business in the middle of the neighborhood, it's a hotel. And this discussion is all about, well, this is from the perspective, we're gonna accommodate this because it's probably too late to do anything. And I think we need to back up and talk again about concerns. And I just want to throw out one concept. If the government wants people to do something less, there's something they can do. What's that? So,
That's all. Where's the hotel industry
industry on this issue.
Yeah, well, they-
It seems like they should be coming
I know,
out
they should
strong
be going
against
fit,
this.
yeah.
And does the hotel industry pay taxes on each
Absolutely.
night's stay?
We get.
Does
Overland
Burgos
Park gets a
pay
lot of
taxes?
revenue
Hotel
from
industry
tax.
owns a lot of-
Well, the state legislation for Kansas, because I actually spoke to a representative at the state of Kansas 2 weeks ago, and you know what ends up happening for the tax. So I think it's pretty clear the state doesn't really want to do much regarding short-term rentals. Most states don't, but you only have to pay tax on the short-term rentals to the state if you make over $100,000 in revenue. I'd say most of these rentals are not making quite that much. But the hotels, right? The hotels would make more than that. So yes, I think the answer to that question is that the hotels do in most cases have to pay tax to operate their business, but because of that state legislation for short-term rentals, that's not the case, right? So it's also, how do you protect the hotelier? I've been pulled into some late night hotelier meetings and heard some really interesting perspectives from them, but yeah, they're part of the community and they want a level playing field. And frankly, these rentals are going to operate whether you ban them or not. You can make it harder for them to operate, but
Mike, let me interrupt you for a second. So, John Schramm with that. But I'm actually on both sides of this issue because we actually have a rental property in Florida. We don't rent a ton. But I can tell you the way Florida works, it's per night. You have to register. You got to pay a fee. I got to submit a monthly report every month. Per night's rented. There's a tax associated with every single night. Even if it's zero, you still have to report it, or you get a fine for not turning in a monthly report. It is very well regulated. I also am a huge fan of the short-term rental market. So for all of our kids that went to college, that's how we go and do the college visit. We go rent a house, we have a taco night, meet all our friends. I personally way prefer Airbnb or hotels. So the industry itself, I don't think is going away. I think a solution like this that gives you visibility to what's going on in the community is a must. Like this is a no-brainer for the homes. And then
yeah, and it's
what's the fee, and you could limit it, say 6 months or greater, and that gets rid of the short-term rental market. But there's a huge demand for the short-term rental market, and we can figure out a way around it, especially anywhere there's a college campus or any kind of a tourist attraction.
Or soccer families who are.
Or soccer families who come for tournaments. So and I think you absolutely need visibility. I think you absolutely want to make sure that people are doing it right. And there's always going to be bad actors in any industry.
Florida is a different place than Overland Park. Florida is built on tourism, and they have the system down. Overland Park is dealing with,
I don't want to go to a hotel because I want to have a party at a house.
That's a whole Florida. I mean,
That's what we're doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
But not.
But Mike, if you have any closing statements, we gotta essentially turn it back to the audience here. Any closing statement you have? Anything else you want to finish with?
yeah, no, I think the only thing I would say is whatever y'all end up doing, it's going to take proactive enforcement. I do feel like it is important to do the neighborly thing, right? So I think an affidavit would be a really good idea. It is important to respond to complaints before these parties and these bad apples, these bad actors, like you were talking about, before things get out of hand. We are able to help with all of that, right? And it helps, helps the city and the residents have some type of compromise. And Florida, yes, some communities in Florida, they are built for tourism. But almost anywhere, I think there's a lot of people that want to go to Overland Park. There's a lot of people that want to come here to Durango, Colorado, where I live. But we are seeing this everywhere, and it's not stopping, even when there is an outright ban. Even when there is, hey, you know what? We're only going to allow short-term rentals where the owner lives on site. It doesn't fix the problem. right? So it's making sure that we have our finger on the pulse, can proactively identify and notify and respond to any issues that are coming up. But I think it also comes down to Dr. Faris, what you and I spoke about is that your goal here is an evidence-based government, right? And this is part of that, right? You can't have evidence without data, you know, and you can't really make decisions without data, which is why a lot of communities, they're even just purchasing address identification with us just to have all of the information to be able to make the right next decision about short-term rentals. What do we do, right? Because now we have all the information. So I think I'll leave it at that.
That was a great presentation. Thank you. I'll talk to you tomorrow. I'll send some of these slides to the governing body, and thank you very much. I'll talk to you soon, Mike. And
yeah, thank you. Thank you all for letting me join. Have a great weekend.
you're welcome to stay on the meeting. Thank you.
Perfect. I'm gonna go hang with my family.
Okay, enjoy.
All right, bye.
All right, take care. All right, back to you guys. It's free for all, right?
Sorry, here's I have one comment. I mean, as a business owner in Kansas City, and a business owner a long time, I like the hotel industry and making it a living field for them is not a concern of mine. I feel like if you're a business owner, you have to provide something that people want to buy. I don't like when we're regulating something to protect one industry or another as technology changes. I've owned an IT business since '96, and if we hadn't evolved and grown and changed, we would have been out of business a long time. So that is not a hot button for me. And I will say, this is going to be difficult to regulate no matter what, because last year when there was no prom at the high schools, we hosted prom at our house and had 30 kids, and we had one kind of a party, and we have other friends and acquaintances who hosted a prom at their house, and it was a totally different kind of a deal. So it's really difficult to regulate something like this, and I don't know if we need to have bigger consequences for those homes, or go after in some legal way the owners of those homes that are hosting this kind of a thing, and find ways to prosecute them. I'm not even sure, but I think like spending $6 grand to figure out who it is seems like a no-brainer to me. Especially when I saw a proposal to build some stupid bridge across a non-line street for $8 billion. I mean, like, talk about a city that's penny wise and pound foolish. Like, come on.
That wasn't actually.
What, I mean, like,
Artist
the
rendering.
fact that we're even having a conversation about walking around on College Boulevard, I don't know how much money our city has spent on studying the walkability of college.
There would be a motel in the middle of it.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah.
So I think that this is like Jeff said, I think this is a tough one. And again, we've been on the other side. I mean, our family likes, we vacation using VRBO or Airbnb every time we can all over the world. We just did it in Sweden, in a neighborhood where we stay. And for us, when we rent, we have to do an adequate job of vetting. But for some of the stuff, and my friends who've used Airbnbs all over Overland Park, who they're renovating their home, they're in somewhere for a month or 3 weeks or a week if they're redoing their home, of course. There's lots of people who have a rental home like this. I know several of them, and the ones that are good, vet their people really carefully so they don't end up with an issue like this. And the people who suck at it or don't care if their house gets destroyed and they have a party. Yeah.
That's a good point. I travel a lot for work, almost everywhere in the world, and stay in Airbnb. I know the software, how it works. I work on Airbnb, I develop all the API. This software we can do it finally, it's like we free. But
Mike is not there anymore.
as Sam said, right, you can just go, search for Overland Park, rentals when you have to go. That is going to be, there is a good company called DNA. They just have pretty well all over the world from Microsoft. They can give you that for monthly, $50, right? They'll give you that. They will give you the address. But this one cannot penetrate to that. It's going to show you that this is where it is in this area. But I can list one and I can change the map, right? But you cannot see the address. See the address, you have to penetrate within Airbnb or VRBO using that API and get that address become number one. Number two, if you are into it, right?
tomorrow you are hosting a party, how do I know that, how does that, they may not doing it, right? I have to have a permission to know this property is good for 20 people. The fact, 20 people, tomorrow they are hosting it, so you can prevent it, the law enforcement and trigger it, hey, tomorrow, this many people are hosting for 5 days, 20 people are all spiking for it, right? So this one information is going to black, you can search, everybody can search, it's not going to solve the problem. To solve the problem, I'm living next to you, I'm having party. So you're going to call police anyway, right? There is people are going parties and drinking, noise, regardless of somebody's getting called or not, right? So the proactive way is putting limitation. Hey, if you're having a view or Airbnb, you cannot host party there, not more than 5 people. Things like that. I know this guy, Kishore, what happened, when they're right? This guy allowed like 15 people, 20 people, he should not do that. I said that, they asked me driver license, they asked me to sign 20 pages of agreements. No firearms, no more than 2 people, no party outside, all those regulations I have to sign in Airbnb. That way I can do it, but by the time that I just override the rule and we pick up. So that way we can try to regulate it, to stop those kind of things. But this house, they allowed more than 15 people, they should not do that. That we do it. Stopping the entire, the shorter window is going to happen.
So one more time, this part of presentation was my brother name just so we could know if we could have our eyes on it. Because I faced that argument last time that, oh, we really can't do it. Okay, so that argument tomorrow on Monday when we have that conversation, if you're saying we can't see it, then the answer is yes, we can. Either this way, and we have a staff member at the city who does it, or we're going to go by X, Y, or Z. It has nothing to do with the policy. It was just giving you the possibility.
You said that was called something. Yeah, there is a better way of approaching this one. It gives you this many properties are booked for Saturday night. This many people are coming. Then you can sort it out by number of people. Like 20 people are coming to this property. Higher risk, right? DNA is that? Yeah, DNA, DNA. Okay, and you can focus on the high risk properties, right? Anyway, the neighbor is going to call it.
Before party goers get there, our police.
I know, I mean, that crossed my mind, it's like requirement to have a video security system or dispatch to tie in there.
Faris, can the city, these are talking about state taxes, can't the city have taxes to pay for what you have to do to monitor this? I mean, that's
City
why
can
I'm
apply
taxes.
fees.
Huh?
City can apply fees to the license. City cannot adjudicate taxes on itself, on a certain thing, but they can apply fees.
Fees to a
Fees
license.
to a license.
How about the county?
But
Taxes are all different.
the problem with that is then we're relying on them to report it too. That's why a lot of these communities have hit them with a high licensing fee up front.
You see, I think one of the main questions we need to answer is that do we distinguish between a responsible, reliable owner versus somebody who is gonna just rent it? If that distinguish is there, if we want to distinguish between them, then our focus is gonna be on empowering mechanisms which would eliminate the bad ones. And by the nature of that, we let the good ones to move on. Or if what I read about legal is right, we want to pursue a model like that, which says, listen, we don't want this thing here, end of the story. You know, you have to understand what is our philosophy observing this issue.
Do we have just a few bad actors? Yeah, do we need to be do we need to factor how many other ones have go, and how many police, whenever they sign up or.
Well, I think we also need to be careful when we use statistics in ways where we say, oh my gosh, it grew 30%. We're talking about total number under 300, which in the grand scheme of things is a very small number. Is it a growing issue? Maybe. But right now it's an insignificant number. It's not insignificant if you look next door, but it's an insignificant number. And then you take that insignificant number and you say, oh, it's 30%. Well, guess what? If I had 2 and it went to 4, I mean, so, I mean, that is as a percentage is a big number, right? So I think we need to be cognizant of that and careful about how we approach things. When you say it as a percentage, it's huge, and if you say it as an aggregate number, it's not so huge.
Numbers and percentages, sure, I agree. The numbers are small as far as the units, but you've got a couple of murders in professional life. That's too much, okay?
No,
So,
I agree.
in addition to murders, what about the effect of surrounding property values and everything else that come into play? So you've got to take all this
You would
consideration.
have the same, I would say this, in our old neighborhood, in Leawood, we had a house across the street that probably was blighted on the inside, you couldn't see it. They had drug deals in the front yard, we called the police multiple times, like my 11-year-old's like, I think I just saw a drug deal across the street of our cul-de-sac, and she did, and you know what the police said? Yeah, that's probably what she saw. And so they had parties, we called the police every single time, I mean, so the same issue can happen with a homeowner who's not renting it out, who, you know, I mean, and that was an issue for our subdivision, it was an issue for us personally, it was an issue for the neighbors, and they weren't renting. They just, actually, they were renting rooms eventually by the end of it. But that was an issue the whole time until those people finally moved and sold their house to someone else. So some of the issue that we would have with a big party is probably outside the rental issue. This just exacerbates it. And I agree. You have a murder in your neighborhood for any reason. That's awful.
This young lady had a question right here.
A few more details came out about the last one, that the gun was stashed in the next door, under the next door neighbor's deck that was used to kill the lady. That was
When the cops showed up, they kind of tried to hide.
They tried to hide everything, so you're living next door and the gun is under your deck from the party house next door. I know it's not every house, but, you know. And Overland Park has no problem having ordinances for everything. Your trash cans have to be somewhere, your grass, your color, everything has to be just whatever. Why can't there be some kind of?
They can have all the parties they want, but if their trash cans are in their own
That's
place,
right. Why is there no ordinance? I sat in a meeting and the developers, they said, we ripped out a hotel because it had became so bad. There was things going on at this hotel that we didn't want to have happen. So now we're at the houses where things are, you know, why is there no control?
I agree with you on the city ordinances. I mean, Overland Park sent out two people in 2 separate cars to move our Stop Deer Creek high density signs, to pick them up out of people's yards, not on the side of the street, inside of the sidewalk, in their actual yard, because it wasn't 11 feet from the curb. So like we have the resources,
to work for you.
we have the resources to send 2
resources to do
people
that.
out to pick up signs that were, 9 feet from the curb, because someone called and complained, and I know who it was, but.
I'm under the impression we're only supposed to go
So
out.
you're exactly right that we have ordinances for a lot of things, so.
So one question is to the group is just show of hands. Who's for it? Who's against it? Who's for it?
But
doing
it would be-
Airbnb.
No,
I'm just
for
saying
Airbnb
for
against
doing it and allowing it to continue, maybe with regulations, everything else. Who's for that? Give it a shot, see what it goes. Who's against? Hold it.
Yeah. I don't want to say yes.
So,
Probably more
I'm
fun
for anything.
questions rather than.
Yeah, you know what? I'm just trying to get a general feeling. If we did the regulations, we threw out the bad actors by 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out, you get no license, we follow up, we get rid of you. I mean, we can add all that stuff, but just from a general feeling, let me re-ask the question. Who would like to have one in your neighborhood and it doesn't matter to you? Raise your hand. Because some of us don't. I'm not saying I do, but who's against
John is
it?
for it, but doesn't want it in his neighborhood.
I'm not running around Florida. I mean, I bought it now.
No, now who really would not want them in your neighborhood?
Woo, we
That's
have 5
what
on
I'm
our
looking
street.
for. Okay, that's what I'm looking
We
for.
live across from where the shooting was.
I agree.
If it is in controlled manner, I would like vote for it. For example, that the person said, hey,
Yeah,
I know the bad
that's
people.
the second part of the
Yeah, yeah.
question. know, I wouldn't want it in my neighborhood. I mean, I got apartments, so they come and go, but bottom line is, we don't want them in the neighborhoods, but if we did want them in the neighborhoods, because we're for it, and we think that it's a viable business in a neighborhood with regulations, would that be okay with the people who don't want it in the neighborhood? You see my point?
Yes.
I'd rather not have it, but if I did the proper regulations and I did the permitting, I did everything right, and I could manage it without shootings, without that kind of thing, without 40 cars parked up and down the street, would that be okay? I guess that's what I'm looking for.
Don't
Yeah, I
connect
guess,
it to
yeah.
an HOA.
I like that buffer.
I spoke with 3 realtors during the last week, because it has to be triplicate for me always. So all 3 of them were like, if you want to sell a house and there is a Airbnb or any sort of short-term rental on a regular basis in that neighborhood, you have to put it on the form. It's considered nuisance. You have to declare it, just like your basement was flooded. Or it's a bottom of your basement. And if you don't, you're gonna be in trouble later with the buyer. So that you guys know. 3 of them told me that it's considered nuisance, and you have to declare it that I'm selling this house, and 2 houses down is a short term.
So
Yeah.
I also
Yeah.
like to say something. When you are the property owner, yes, you have to disclose that, and yes, you would be in trouble. But when a person opens up an Airbnb across the street from you and does it so discreetly and sneaks into your neighborhood and takes away my right to be able to sell my property, it's not fair. And then a pushback to your graduation party, I appreciate that. You have that once a year, once in a lifetime. We get it.
This is every
all
weekend.
the time.
Yeah.
30, 40 cars. We have construction men who come. They bring their huge vehicles, and
Trailers.
in February of 2021, they tied up the street, is it 153rd Street? They start their diesel engines. They have to heat up because diesel has to heat up. It was very cold. It snowed. The snowplow could not get down the road. And they had that tied up for a half hour before, an hour running all these things, talking loudly. Then to watch them park these vehicles, they bring all their construction equipment with them. They leave that part. I've watched, there's things I just can't even mention,
And
but
the ones on our street are not what you see on television.
no.
Come for a vacation and you jump in the pool and you're having a
Yeah.
cookout. I can tell you, I have contacted the city through OP Cares multiple times in the last 2 years to get them to mow their grass, to get them to take care of the weeds, to get them to trim the
What
shrubs,
was the response?
to
on
get
that?
them
Was the
to
city
move the
response?
trash cans and not put them out 4 days ahead. Their 24/7 person is, you get an answering machine. The properties aren't pretty. They are taking away, you want to regulate them and regulate them to the hilt, because they're taking away the property value of my home that I've lived in for 20 years in Blue Valley schools, where those homes could possibly have been sold to a young family needing what you need, affordable housing in Overland Park. These aren't pretty. They're not well kept. They're for construction workers. Last week, we had some sort of a giant team. We've had cars with broken out windows parked in front. That doesn't add to my property value. So regulate all you want, but man, you better regulate to the hilt, because those 5 on my street, I'm sure aren't going anywhere because they've probably been grandfathered in. But they've got to be regulated more. There just have to be some more ordinances, because they're taking away the neighborhood feel of our non-HOA street.
See, and then enforcement of all that comes in, the police can't do that, they can't.
No.
You call them up, they're not gonna run down there and cite them
No.
for illegally
No.
parking.
And that's why I'm
et cetera, et
constantly doing
cetera.
OP Cares.
So that's
Yeah.
why we're here, to try to figure this out.
Right.
And I fully hear you, I wouldn't want that across. the
And none of that comes back on the owner, even if they do.
Right.
Right, now I call.
I wonder if this is backing up a little, I don't know if this has been a discussion in the city, but I had a real estate agent told me that 20 or 30% of all sales now are not to individuals wanting to live in a home, they're big equity, or I don't know who big equity is. But I suspect some of these are VRBO, Airbnb, but the intent is to rent them. So I just wonder if that's an issue. I know my son lives in Nashville and we VRBO their son and he knows there. They really crack down and it's hard to rent a place out there that you don't live in. They really crack down a lot.
So everybody's cracking down with us?
Well, you know, I don't know if you guys, if you'd be a lot of times people have the ability to create private space in their home, like through the basement door and it's separate. They allow that, but they really crack down on just the whole house.
Absentee rental, yeah.
I mean,
Because
I
they
get
have
some
to suffer if the people are bad, so I think that is a good place to think about
The
going.
regulation was tricky about it is if it's going to continue, the regulation, I think, needs to be preemptive. It can't be, oh, there's one murder, strike one. Oh, there's another murder,
Yeah.
strike two.
There
I mean,
were
that
complaints
doesn't make a lot
about,
of sense.
before the murders, it was they're at the neighborhood pools, the traffic, the noise. It escalated to the murders.
Okay, yeah.
The
So-
fact remains that at 151st, we were very lucky we even had a dead body on our hands. Because 20 shots, right?
Yeah, those
Yeah, I mean,
bullets go over a mile.
I will just say, here's kind of where I'm at, and I was kind of annoyed by him. Because it was obviously kind of a sales pitch.
I was gonna say the sales pitch.
If we do permitting, I can collect a fee off that and justify my, whatever. Here's where I'm at. Single family neighborhoods create a community. They create the culture of the community. Not hotels, not Airbnbs, not neighborhoods, right? That is it. And this is a growing problem, a rapidly growing problem. Overland Park is not Laguna Beach, right? If you buy a house in Laguna Beach and you don't think people are gonna be renting their houses, you're stupid. Right? I don't know what to say, right? You live in Laguna Beach, oh well, there's an ocean right there. Or even in Scottsdale, people have you got the snowbird, you got a house in.
Or big events, if you live.
Lake of the Ozarks, you live in Lake of the Ozarks, you're gonna, we live in Overland Park, right? If money was the only consideration of property, I would sell my house right now and move into an apartment because this real estate bubble is gonna burst, right? But it's more than money, right? My investment portfolio is money. My house is where I live, it's my home. It is an emotional connection that I have. It is my life. And we get into these things like our assignment and stuff where it's all about once we get to the point of calling the police, way before calling the police, I'm miserable, right?
Yeah.
I don't have neighbors. I don't have a community. And I believe if we don't pre-aggressively stop this, how we stop it can be complicated. But we have to first decide we want to, right? We have to first decide what do we want to do. And I will tell you, that's kind of where I am. I'm more there even now after listening to this. These kind of things are to give us the data to be able to stop it. Right? You have to know where it is.
Or just be reactive, which is.
But I'm gonna tell you, I don't listen to someone say to me, when he said this, it annoyed me. If I'm having a hard time financially, I have a right to wreck my neighborhood and rent my house out. Are you kidding me? Well, I guess I have the right to sell drugs. I mean, no, you don't have the right to turn your residential home into a commercial enterprise. No one gave you that right. They zoned for that. That is bullshit.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I don't want to hear that. I am so sympathetic to people who live in these areas that are already their areas being compromised with this stuff. And I'm not sympathetic to someone saying, well, I have a right to make money here, or I have my rights to, no, you don't have a right to wreck the neighborhood, right? And I'm even less sympathetic about the property value. I mean, it is a property value issue, but it's a lifestyle issue. Do people feel safe in their neighborhoods? Do they enjoy waking up every morning?
To
Walking out their
strangers?
bars? And you get just people coming and going constantly. There's no consistency, there's no relationship. So I will tell you, I am far on the side of how we do it, we gotta figure out and be smart. But I am largely on the side of this is not good. This is not gonna make Overland Park a better place to live. Not the Overland Park I want. I'm way closer to Leewood. Right? In fact, the longer I serve on city council, the more I think Leewood does a lot of things that we ought to probably be looking at, going, that's pretty smart. So Leewood's pretty damn nice community. So, I think a lot of things we do head us in the direction of going further away from that, and we have a more commercial community and a more, I'm not gonna name another city close to us, but it feels like it's closer to that than Leewood. I think we have to make our number one priority for me is what makes a person happy in the community to live here. And it is our neighborhoods. And that is too often to me seen as the ninth thing we're worried about. And it should be the first thing we're worried about. So I will shut up about how I think.
That's why I brought up the lodging industry, because the lodging industry has money behind them. And I think they would fight against this, and the city would listen to them more than they listen to us people.
I know.
In my experience at Overland Park.
True. They would, yeah.
Well, let me tell you, on my way here, I heard a commercial that said, if you want to sell your house, you can sell your house. We'll give you the total cash up front, whatever you're selling your house for. And you can live there if you want. If not, you can move, but we'll cash you out of your house for the listed value. What do you think? Who do you think's behind that? You think it's some person that wants to move to Overland Park, or is it a company that's going to buy it, that's going to make it an Airbnb? We're going to make it some type of a rental, or going to rent it out to a business, which is a way around the monthly, because guess what? A business, I don't know, McDonald's Corporation used to do that. Go into a neighborhood, rent a really nice house in a nice neighborhood, and send their executives. And that's what they do. So, and I agree with Jeff. I mean, for us to bring Airbnbs in, I wouldn't want them, and I'll say this again, I don't want them in my neighborhood. And that's all I'll say about it. But I want to know what you think. And we got that out. Some people say, hey, if it's regulated and taxed and all the things that we do, then maybe it's okay. That goes towards maybe somebody buying in, a property owner living there. I rent in my house in Independence. I rent my basement out to a guy. My daughter lives upstairs, but she lives in the house. That's different. Right. That's different, right? But I wouldn't turn it into an Airbnb. So I'm with Jeff. I think that the sanctity of our neighborhoods need to remain the way they are, and to be where I can allow my grandchildren to go out in the cul-de-sac and play basketball and drive around on their bikes, and not on chip seal.
This is on
And
the-
just have to
It's on the agenda to be discussed.
So is it, at this point, I'm trying to, at least before we leave and go back to our daily life. So if this was subject to a agreement by the neighbors, would that eliminate the issue? Because the neighbors, as Jeff is predicting and Scott Mosher is predicting, is gonna say no to it. Is simply gonna say no to it. Number one. Number two is a targeted therapy, the way we say in medicine, which means that if there is this very respectable couple who just wants to have a baby shower once 6 months, make $500, that wouldn't necessarily suffocate that. So I'm more thinking that the Lawrence ordinance, which says if you want to do a short-term rental, and now the needle is moving about defining short-term rental. Less than 3 months, we can say, less than 6 months, we can say. You have to have an agreement, and if you don't live there, you have to have an agreement of your neighbors. And we can say, even if you live there, you have to have an agreement of your neighbors. This seems to me that what I hear from you guys is that it's gonna essentially be a good step to take as a pilot project.
I think that would be a great step for somebody that doesn't have an HOA or whatever. But then how do you enforce that? Let's say everybody signs off on it. The neighbors say, no, we don't want it, but they go ahead and do it anyway. Then you call the police, and sort of what we've had here, and they're like, well, okay, do they really do anything? Are they gonna let it go?
Because right now, at this
And
point,
then
they are
what
not
do you
acting
do
based on, they don't have a license.
about all the properties that are already there?
I assume they're gonna get.
They're not going to go back and say,
My
"How's
thought
that
is
okay?"
if you crack the door open, somebody's gonna run it through.
It sounds like a lot of weeds to get into.
Yeah, so.
It's just weeds, you gotta have good policy. I'm kind of like you, I'm leaning more towards legal. I mean, I was more open to it, but now that I hear your experience, construction workers who could stay in a hotel.
Yeah.
Because the companies have money to pay them, they're staying in your
No.
neighborhood.
Or
No.
parties that you have 30 and 40 people sleeping in a house for, I mean, and it
And
just
they-
goes on, and then the cleaning people come in the next day and maybe clean for 1 hour.
An hour.
1 hour, a whole house,
Hmm.
you know, and
I thought we
so
already had
that,
an ordinance.
Is Leewood successful? I mean, I know you're not gonna get it on.
Isn't it 8 people or something?
And do you grandfather people in, if you made that rule, do you give them 3 years to get out, or you just say it's?
so that's what concerns me.
I live in a subdivision, Overland Park, and there is no HOA. So that is not available to those of us that live there.
Right.
We don't have this umbrella organization to represent all the homeowners. And I live in an area that's been greatly impacted by the workers redevelopment. People are selling their houses or renting them, hand over fist in my neighborhood. There isn't a week goes by when rental sign isn't plugged on somebody's front yard. So the neighborhood that you spoke about so eloquently is being destroyed. It's not a thermonuclear explosion destruction. It's a rotting away of the homes that are in my neighborhood and the adjacent neighborhoods for that matter too. So a lot of the protections that are available to those that are fortunate to live in a homeowners association are not available to me and my neighbors. I also happen to have 2 of the world's worst city council members in Ward 2. I won't use their names because I wouldn't want to embarrass them.
We could have a discussion about it.
And from a practical standpoint, I guess I lived in a bit of a bubble where when I read a 6-bedroom house, which is a nice house, a woman who doesn't live here is murdered by a man who doesn't live here in a 6-bedroom house at 151st Street.
Owned by a guy that lives in Texas.
I'm shocked by that. I'm absolutely shocked. And I can't believe that there is.
There's less than
Let me
10.
take one step back. We said no pit bulls in Overland Park. Nobody stood up for the pit bull owners. It just happened, did it not? And did we not just now reverse that?
Yeah.
So it can happen. If it doesn't get bogged down in, oh, we gotta protect the rights of this one person that wants to have a baby shower. That don't matter.
You're gonna have a
It
baby
does
shower
not
anyway,
matter.
and the neighbors understand, and maybe they'll be invited, so it's all good.
So where's the mayor stand on this?
So
That's
the
where you
question
gotta
got asked to.
5 to
So-
4, all the votes are 5 to 4.
Yeah, so.
That was a loaded question.
Yeah,
That was a
so
loaded
the next
question.
steps is, for folks that weren't aware, we have what's called a committee of the whole. And that's basically prior to city council, you each have a specific topic. So this Monday at, I think it's 6:30, there'll be 2 topics. We're gonna talk about, Dean or Rose or something. Farmers market. And then we're gonna talk about, short-term rentals. So I think the expectation is people will weigh in, they'll talk, and then we'll ask staff to come back with a recommendation or a policy after that discussion. So I think, so someone was emailing me saying, well, you guys need to have it settled by Monday. It's not gonna be settled by Monday. It's gonna be like this, but it's gonna be all the council members, all say their piece, and then we're gonna walk away asking
It's
staff.
gonna be like this, and Scott Hamblin can't talk because he's new.
Yes.
But he wants to talk, and then you.
Yeah.
What I'm afraid of is gonna come out of this meeting Monday night, is they're gonna suggest a commission or something. And then we're gonna have $150,000 consultant
Yeah.
that's gonna have to work with it. And I think the most simplest thing to do is, Kansas City, Missouri has a complete ordinance set, okay? Why don't we email that to the council members? And the council members mark it up, so to speak, as to what what they, you know, like change or whatever, and then put the responsibility on the council members, and then let the community development staff come back with an ordinance, and then let it be stated. I, you know, like I said, I think it's just gonna be cut off for months, 150,000 per consultant, and we can, I think it's simple enough. We don't need to, the wheel's already been invented in Kansas City, Missouri, okay? And you could just say, and it's not like, it sets it up for houses within a certain distance of, you know, where they want it unoccupied. How many residents have to approve it? And then they have an appeal process built in, you know, to that too, and whatnot. And like I said, I'm afraid they're gonna wanna build it from the ground up and spend a couple $100,000 that doesn't need to be spent. And,
The thing I'll say is, and this is what I'm pushing for us to do in the community as a whole, and I will say kind of, this may be an issue that's somewhat different than some other issues. I mean, there are issues you kind of almost know how it's gonna go before you show up, right? I don't know that this is one of those. This isn't maybe in that bucket. But the thing that we have to first decide, and there will not be 100% agreement, but this is what I was talking about. Before we start working on the ordinance, we have to decide what we want to do. And there has to, and I like the fact that we're going to be on camera talking about it, right? That's appropriate. We should out in the open say, this is what I'm for and why. Because the machinery does, there are complications about state laws and municipal laws. What can you do? What can't you do? Could a homeowner challenge you? Like you talk about state legislature. So there's a lot of machinery. But what I was saying is, you first have to get as a governing body a consensus on what you want the ordinance to do. And I really don't know. I don't know where we are. I think this will be a kind of a productive, open conversation, and I'm hopeful that there will be sort of open minds and goodwill toward this issue. But I don't necessarily think this is going to line up like TIFs do, or big developments do. You kind of know how those line up. This may be a little bit.
Jeff, there are some of our colleagues on the council which are very focused on the impact of on affordable housing. Yeah. Okay. Yep. I've read the emails. I predict that you will hear from that angle that we don't have a problem with party rental, we don't have a problem with vacation rental, but that house could be rented to a family and that's not available in this shortage of the affordable or attainable house. I think that angle is going to come down there, and then your angle is going to be there.
So we may get there for different reasons.
Right.
Same place.
Right. So I see a convergence of opinions on doing something, but because of different reasons.
Yeah.
But then in the deployment of what we're going to do, then the battle starts there.
Yeah.
Because once your end goal is different, somewhat the mechanism is going to be defined. But we are doing this so we could hear from people to see what they. Yes, please.
Well, I saved myself for last because I'm the odd man out, except for these people back there. I've been a Airbnb super host for 7 years. I live in the house. No cops have ever been called. I make 6,000 to 8,000 extra income a year. Right now I have a DEA agent. He's going to live for 5 months till his kid gets out of school and they buy a home in Overland Park.
Can I clarify, do you rent a room to these people?
Just a room and a bathroom.
Yeah, that's totally.
I think
But
all we're talking about.
But we're not, because people say Airbnb, they don't even know there's a difference.
Right.
And when you're making your rules and going over all this, I'm the 10%. No troublemaker.
Yeah.
Hardly any of the 10% are troublemakers. How could you be? You're in the home.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't think that's on anyone's radar.
Same with my daughter and her renter or my renter.
But when you come up with your rules, you really have to think about that. Think about me, remember me sitting here talking about it. It's very hard for me I don't do public speaking. But it's important. And I'm not money, and my home is not money, and the money comes in for foundation repairs. I was like, thank God I've got my Airbnbs.
But the thing is, you have neighbors you have to.
And I
you
have,
accountability with.
just so
You
that
have a
they
house
would
that you
not
want
worry.
interest not be-
I live in a neighborhood of mostly single women. It's duplexes.
Right.
And so you really know your neighbors, and I told them what I was up to, and just so when you see strangers coming, you don't get worried. And the one lady who shares my duplex had no idea, and this is like 2 years in. And the other lady said, "Oh, I thought you had a new boyfriend."
No, I have absolutely.
They're really unaware for shared home, entire home. I agree with all of you. I wouldn't want that either. No
Well, entire
way.
home's even fine.
You poor ladies, I'm sorry for you.
It's unoccupied homes.
Right.
I have no interest in regulating a family that wants to rent their house out, make some money over NASCAR weekend, and go on their family vacation to Florida or whatever. I mean, that's, they, like I said.
But they need regulated, because they're gonna have a party, there could be a shooting.
Well, yeah.
I mean,
there could be.
The shootings happen in the hotels, and their owners do not live in Overland Park. They live somewhere else. And a lot of people, the person in charge of their home is a cleaning woman.
Well, yeah.
Now, come on. So I understand what you're saying. Just be very much aware of me and my little pocket, my little side business. I view it more as, there's tax preparers who do work out of their home. They've got people coming in and out all day long, getting their taxes done. There's artists and fortune tellers and bakers, and all these people are working out of their homes, and they're not regulated. Nobody cares. And that's kind of my business, because I'm not interrupting the neighborhood. My guests park in my driveway. I don't even have them park in the street. And, when I have a long-term guest, I need to meet them first. And there's no way to do that unless they book for 1 or 2 nights. Then we introduce ourselves. Is this a good fit? And then I'm like, okay, I'm good with this. Let's.
But see, I think that's where the term short-term rental goes askew, because then people start saying, exactly, oh, so I can't rent my house out for a couple nights, No. My concern is with the business of absentee short-term rentals, party houses. And
Just keep remembering that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Leave me out of
Yeah,
that.
absolutely.
And make it, distinguish it, because it's a very important distinction.
Yeah, it is.
And I don't have 24/7, like right now I'm booked for 5 months for that guy. But before him, I maybe had 5 people over 6 weeks. So it's not every night. And I've had people from England for 7 months. She was a gal that was gonna get married to a person in Overland Park. And she didn't want to live with the guy first. She said, I just don't feel comfortable doing that. I'd rather have my own place, but I can't rent an apartment for 5 months and furnish it. So can I live with you? Or I think she was 7 months. And I said, hot dog. This is good for me. I don't have to do laundry every night I don't have, new person every night. That's a lot of work. So I like a long term. And she didn't even have a car to park anywhere. So anyway, that's another side.
Good information, great information. And I don't think the intent is that, the intent's not that. The intent is the people that are absentee, that are out of
I
To be
just
honest
don't
with
want
you,
mixed
I
up
don't
with
think,
that.
I mean,
this isn't a low-income housing proposition. $152 by 30 days, that's what, 45, 50,
Well,
60?
I
unless
charge
you're- unless
$50
you're-
a
affordable in
night.
my mind.
unless you're using freedom for this to happen to drive down the neighbor's house to create affordable housing.
Right, yeah, there you go.
Well, I mean, yeah, we're getting issues where neighborhoods used to be neighborhoods, like when I grew up and I went to Mrs. Wright's house, because she had our key, and if one of my siblings had already taken the key, I went to the next house because they had a key. We don't know our neighbors anymore. We don't have the sense of community that used to exist, and I will tell you, I mean, we were on the Deer Creek fight. One of the best things that came out of that is I got to really know a lot of my neighbors, and the sense of community is we're working really hard to try to increase the social things so that we know each other. But when corporations come in and are buying houses, for what purpose, I don't know, that's where I think but in my old cul-de-sac, which was in Leawood, where we had the issue with the people across the street, I mean, like, man, I felt like our hands were tied. I mean, we were, and before I called the police, I went over and I talked to the mom and said, this is an issue. I've got little kids, I don't feel like I can have them in the cul-de-sac. And, she had a son who was kind of out of control, and whatever was happening there, that's an issue, but what can we do in the meantime is get to know our neighbors, start hosting a block party again, making our neighborhoods feel like a community and go back to what it means to be a neighbor. And that is not the way that we have been going as a community for quite some time. And I think that now we're like, whoa, how does this happen? That's how it happens. So, I don't know. I think this is a tough one. And I mean, I really feel like,
So
for those of you who live across the street, that's terrifying.
Jill, let me read these 3 comments as we are closing the session today, so they will be heard too. The first one is from Michael Hale. It says, I would like to go on record to express my strong opposition to vacation properties Overland Park. These are not homeowners, but absentee landlords with no investment in maintaining the safety and integrity of our community. The mayor thinks this is a complicated issue, and the answer is just say no. And then the other one is from B to everyone. Yep, there are about 5 Airbnbs on 151st Place where the shooting occurred last year. The landlord was more concerned with his property damage following the party than shooting and potential loss of life. And then Michael Hills again says, seems to me with 2 shootings, 90% corporate ownership and 30% YoY growth, the problem is already out of hand, and town leadership is failing miserably to keep our communities. Any closing comments, council members first, and then you guys, and then on Monday, if, again, for people who are online, if you feel passionate about this, please show up. I don't think we have public hearing on committee on the whole, which is another.
Yeah, I don't think you'll let us.
You could do comment in the general meeting after.
Right, but in the public comments at 7:30, if you want to book, sign up by 3 o'clock and speak at 7:30 for it, against it, whatever.
Is the committee of the whole online?
Everything is on.
That's
6:30 is
okay.
committee on the whole, 7:30 is city council meeting. You can be at public comment at 7:30 talking about this.
John has to be there in person because I told him I can overlog the park.
That's right. Show up one more time.
One more time.
More time to get it.
My kids are like, your new hobby is like, go to the city council.
Any comments, Councilmember?
Yeah, I just want to say that I appreciate y'all being here and, being forthright. I mean, we're not going to know unless you say so. I mean, I want to know who's for, who's against, and why, and all that. We could go on and on and on. And I agree with, I don't want a commission either. This isn't that type of a problem. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I think city council can handle it with public input. I think we need to do what the public wants. And to me, it seems pretty overwhelming that, absentee owners and renting and all that doesn't reflect the neighborhood. So I'm just going to leave it at that and tell you that, sending letters to some of the other councilmen, Jim, would probably, I'm hoping that it would change some things, but I will tell you that, they consider downtown a great tourist attraction. And I'll just let it go with that, but sending letters is always a good thing. And, please be communicative, and say your piece, because I'm hoping that eventually, we're here, we want to listen. And I think some others say they want to listen, let's put them to the task and help them listen.
I think I was pretty clear on where I'm at. But I will say, I appreciate people showing up and expressing their views. It matters more than you think, and it matters more when you send emails and stuff. I mean, it does get people's attention, and when don't just say something angry, but really thoughtful emails. I think to the whole it does impact people, and so I would encourage you to do that.
The only other thing and I'm not even sure why I'm stating this because it doesn't apply to me at all, but the entire home Airbnbs, the vacation rentals, I kind of hate to see Overland Park do away with them altogether, because I know many of us have gone to other locations and rented the homes for our own families. And so not in my backyard, but I can go to Florida and do what I want, or I can go somewhere else.
Well,
And,
that's their business.
and so,
Other places.
well, it is, but
That's their business.
I hope people kind of think about that a tiny bit too, because many of us have used them, if not all of us in here.
You go to the
It's a popular way to travel.
I have one more comment. If we find a regulated way of avoiding party houses and making more people and disturbing the neighbor, then draw a fine line, that will help, I would say that I have a house and I rent it out, but there is no any issues. There are professional mathematicians, scientists, and people, consulting people, they come here. I don't allow more than 3 people, 4 people. I never had any issues. I have 20 regulations, more than the city has, right? They have to have the driver license, they have to have their firearms, the diggler. If the firearms coming inside the house, the police comes there and check them, they have license or not, right? All the regulations, I never had any issues so far. So then sometime I go there and check with them, where are you here, where are you here, which company you work for, things like that. So most of them are professional. I can sense if they are going to host a party or not, immediately cancel it. So I've been canceling almost 20, 50 of the reservations because I don't care about money, I care about the neighbors.
So, thank you for sharing your voices.
Appreciate it.
Yeah,
That's what I
thank you
request
for
you guys.
listening.
That's what I request you guys, if you guys able to draw a fine line between who is hosting the party. I know Kishore, the guy who, what happened, he allows more people, that is not acceptable. Yeah,
Scott, all I'll say is, thank you definitely for showing up. And, as he hit on the emails always, or even if nothing happens at the time, for instance, you guys were emailing a year ago.
Yeah.
Now that's gonna help with this, that's what a politician doesn't want on their head, is, I told you so a year ago, and that's what this is.
You have a couple of those.
Yeah, and so,
Hard broken
and so
into.
that's why it matters, even if you don't see anything immediately, maybe, it could matter later, it could speed things up. But, I guess where I stand now, and we'll see what's proposed tomorrow, is, if it's something we're gonna allow to continue, and I'm only speaking of absentee, then I think the regulation needs to be preemptive and pretty loophole proof to be considered, and that's what that is. I don't know yet. So
Thank you, everybody. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Jim, you want to say something?
Before everybody leaves, I don't mean to just be the last word, but I want to tell you, thank you guys.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much.
For coming out, listening, being straightforward with your comments, because that isn't the case with a lot of Overland Park City. At least I don't feel like it is. I think there's masking of the true intent, or failure to vocalize what a person really wants once they get on the city council.
Jim, 4, 5, and 6 will always listen to you.
I like it.
Thank you all, appreciate it.
Well, thanks again.
Thank you all so much.